Hey everyone, this is John Coleman. Welcome back to our channel. Today we have a very special guest. We have Nicole Bufanio from Mercer's career practice, and Nicole is here to tell us, as the expert, what this new thing called the New York City Pay Transparency Act actually is. Hey Nicole, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John. So excited to be here talking to you about this.
So Nicole, I've been reading a little bit about this act. It's been in the news, right? So what exactly is the new New York City Pay Transparency Act? And candidly, why does it
The New
matter?
York City pay transparency law is going to require employers with a small amount of employees to post what they say is a good faith salary range for the role. This will apply to part-time and full-time positions. So what does this mean? When you think about it, it's going to affect employers ranging from that little family-owned restaurant on Queens Boulevard to the Titans of Wall Street. They're all going to be required to disclose pay information whenever they are looking to hire employees into specific roles. This law is actually similar to others that have gone into effect in the United States, such as Colorado's pay transparency law. But really, what does this mean? Pay transparency legislation, such as the New York City law, is helping to level the playing field for job candidates. They'll be able to pursue positions that meet their salary requirements and self-select out of roles that don't. In a tight labor market where the candidate may already have the upper hand, this could be perceived as a revolution. But thinking about employers, there's something big to consider here. I think that employers should look beyond the compliance exercise of just posting a salary range and focusing on that. The priority should be focusing on how to communicate pay within their four walls, and going beyond that, how to articulate the employee value proposition, what it means to be an employee there. Think about it this way. Overnight, employees will have more information about pay than they may have ever had before. And survey data suggests that employers have historically kept pay close to the vest. Suddenly, it'll be out to the open for everyone to see, candidates, employees, everyone. And I think that employers really need to proactively address this topic. So, I think that there is pay data available for people currently, but this law is going to change the landscape. We have a site like Glassdoor, for example. Users provide data points about their current pay, depending on what their position is. And truthfully, that data may not be reliable at all. Let's say you're a marketing director. You look at Glassdoor, you see that there's been like 10 marketing director salaries posted. And the range is from $150,000 to $250,000, which is quite a range. But what you don't see in that data is that 7 out of 10 of the past marketing directors spent 10 years in the role while you were promoted last year. And yet, because your employer hasn't communicated your salary range to you, you might think that the Glassdoor data is fact. And you might wonder why you're making $150,000 when others were making much more. So in the absence of information from your employer, you draw your own conclusions. Truly, it's best if employers prepare their organizations for this kind of pay transparency legislation with meaningful communication.
Seems like this could be something where there's a lot of work for employers to do. As an employer, what do you actually do to make sure that you're compliant with this new mandate and you're doing the right thing? Are there any tools and resources or samples that can be used?
So I want to start this response by saying that I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a legal expert, and I can't tell you exactly what you need to do to comply with this law from a legal standpoint. Based on what we know, it's our understanding that employers must post a minimum of a salary range and a maximum of a salary range for specific roles. But I think that, John, your question raises a lot of factors for employers to consider about their pay practices, because that's an important component in preparing for such legislation. And I think that it's important to think about these considerations in terms of what's like the near term and what's that longer term, roadmap that people are going to have. In the near term, it's like thinking about whether your infrastructure is really set up for the effective date of the law. Questions you might ask yourself are like, do we have salary ranges for our roles, even if they're informal, even if it's just a number that the hiring manager has in mind? based on their budget for their team? Do we have a current pay philosophy, and can we articulate that to employees and something that we might be able to market externally? And do we intend to move toward greater pay transparency in the future? I think focusing on these key areas may make meeting the legislation's requirements feel more manageable to many employers. But of course, you can think longer term. You can consider whether, does it make sense to have a job architecture so that our levels have some alignment and consistency, and that we can have associated pay ranges, assigned to those levels. You could think about whether your current pay is even competitive. In this landscape where the candidate is holding the cards, there's been a lot of shifts in terms of what market competitive may mean. So if you haven't done a pay study in a few years, it may be a good time to think about doing that. You could also think about whether you're able to defend your pay practices when it comes to pay equity. Can you credibly say, and certainly say, that you aren't paying people differently based on their gender or race? And I think finally, the key consideration that employers might think about on the longer term roadmap is whether they understand employee sentiment about pay and about their total rewards package. That's a very important piece to get the employee voice there. I wouldn't suggest biting off more than you can chew, from an employer standpoint, but there's definitely opportunities to reinforce and enhance your infrastructure and move toward greater transparency. This is not a moment, this is a movement, and it may be what the market demands going forward.
Great. Well, Nicole, thank you very much for joining us today. Really, really appreciate it, and super informative.
Thanks so much for your time, John. It's been so great talking about this with you.
Absolutely. And for those of you out there, if you like what you're seeing, we encourage you to like the video, share, and until next time, thank you for joining.